Chapter 954. At that moment it was as if he had suddenly heard a huge nightmare or a disaster. Saint's body suddenly trembled. He looked straight at Li Tianlan and said in a hoarse voice, "Wang Tianzong?" He was destined to be a figure that would not be forgotten in a short time. But he was also a figure that was rarely mentioned in the past 2 years. He was invincible in the world. He shocked the world and was supreme. The peak of the Wang family of Beihai and Wang Tianzong's personal glory were so short. At the moment when he was really supreme, the eternal sword above Mormons directly ended everything. That was the real day of the end. It had only been less than 2 years since the chaos in Mormons, but when it was mentioned at this time, it seemed to be really a thing of the last era. Saint's heart was in turmoil, and he couldn't calm down at all. Although he didn't want to admit it, he had to admit that Wang Tianzong, who appeared in Mormons that day, was enough to be a nightmare for most people in the dark world, including Lin Fengting, Li Guangtu, and naturally Saint. He was now in the invincible realm and was a top expert in the dark world. But compared with Wang Tianzong at that time, he was really insignificant. That was the Real Supreme, the peak of the dark world for hundreds of years or even longer. He was brilliant and invincible. Perhaps except for Li Tianlan, no one could treat Wang Tianzong equally in that state. What was Wang Tianzong's current state? After more than 2 years of silence, did he recover some strength so quickly? It was like a shadow that once existed had once again covered the sky. Saint's heart was a little cold, and even his tone became a little cold. It can't be so fast. It's absolutely impossible. Why are you excited? Li Tianlan glanced at him. Saint opened his mouth and didn't know what to say to express his emotions. After a long time, he said with a bitter smile, "Your Majesty, why do you think that the Sword Emperor has recovered? He hasn't fully recovered yet, but he's still a supreme genius after all. After such a long time, it's impossible for him to not have any tricks up his sleeves and allow himself to be trampled on." Li Tianlan shook his head and said, "The Wang family of Beihai is too confident. I can't tell what I feel." In the game between Beihai and Zhongzhou State, at the beginning, Beihai could be said to have made concessions step by step. But I don't know when it started. There is no specific time, but the whole of Beihai suddenly became tough. For example, Wang Xingxiao's speech to the whole of Beihai and the large-scale conscription of the Beihai Corps. It was precisely because this attitude was beyond Shen Fangqing's expectations that he felt that many things were out of his control. That was why his actions became more and more radical, and in the end, he pushed forward the termination plan. All of this seems to have been deliberately guided. If I'm not mistaken, Wang Tianzong's state has changed before and after that speech. I don't know what the specific changes are, but at that realm, his recovery ability may not be much worse than his combat capability. You reminded me to pay attention to Li Guangtu's condition. Li Guangtu might get better. Why can't Wang Tianzong do the same? It's not the same thing. Saint smiled bitterly and said, "Li Guangtu's injury is far less serious than Wang Tianzong's. We all know the power of that sword. Wang Tianzong is lucky not to die. In our estimation, the most optimistic result is that Wang Tianzong can't recover within 10 years. It's only been 2 years, so it should be impossible." Li Tianlan shook his head slightly and said nothing. What he said just now was all speculation, but what really made him sure that Wang Tianzong's state was gradually recovering was actually the information about Carefree that Lin Yuxian told him. Carefree might be able to suppress Ruthless in a certain state, but when no one in the whole of Beihai could be sure of his current state, why did Wang Xingxiao dare to attack Ruthless? Because of Carefree? But in this case, it looked like a big gamble. The Wang family of Beihai was indeed crazy, but at this stage, they couldn't afford to gamble at all. So the only answer was that the Wang family of Beihai didn't care about his state. Even if his current state could suppress and devour Ruthless Carefree, the Wang family of Beihai wouldn't care. The only reason that could make Wang Xingxiao so confident, apart from the so-called compensation, was Wang Tianzong. "I have a hunch." Li Tianlan chuckled. "The final battle in Beihai this time will definitely give everyone a huge surprise." If that's the case, Saint hesitated for a moment. If that's the case, it's most appropriate for me to go by myself. Li Tianlan said blandly, at the very least, even if it's impossible, I can at least guarantee that I can escape unscathed. Even if Wang Tianzong has recovered a little, as long as he's not at his peak, there's nothing to worry about. The mysterious expert of the Jiang family, Li Guangtu. Several invincible realm experts. It sounds scary, but at the very least, even if I can't beat them, no one can stop me if I want to leave. If you guys go, maybe it'll be a different situation. Let's go back to Tiannan today. I'll call Du Hanin and Su Chu who are in Beihai to come back. Emperor Dong's palace will concentrate all its forces to East Island, and I'll go to Beihai by myself. This is the safest way. The corner of Saint's mouth twitched, and he said with a helpless and bitter smile, safe, okay, safe. He hesitated for a moment and said in a low voice, but your current state, your guess is right. If I want to maintain the extreme state now, what I squander is indeed vitality. My physical strength is currently unable to bear the absolute power and sword energy, so I can only overdraw. From this point of view, before I make a sword move in the extreme state, I first hurt my body, so I need a lot of vitality to make up for the injury. It's not wrong to say that I overdraw my life. Li Tianlan's voice was very calm. But in fact, the impact on me is not as serious as you think. The huge vitality of the dragon vein of Zhongzhou state may not be able to completely support my unscrupulous waste. But don't forget, compared with the martial arts direction of the Wang family of Beihai's extreme outbreak, what's the best thing about the Li family's martial arts? The Li family's strongest thing was the sword. The Wang family of Beihai's strongest thing was also the sword. The strongest thing of the two was the sword, but the direction was not the same. The martial arts direction of Beihai was extreme outbreak. And the Li family, its extreme balance. Li Tianlan said calmly, so at present, I can maintain this state. There will be an impact, but it won't be very big. Maybe I sleep longer, eat more, and need more rest and adequate nutrition. As for the follow-up impact, it will probably be reflected in a few decades. But after a few decades, my physical strength will be enough to support me to enter a higher realm, so all these problems are not very big. But, Saint hesitated for a moment and used honorifics again. You don't have the body of the invincible realm yet. No matter how balanced you are, it should be difficult to control the power beyond the peak of the invincible realm. You're wrong. Li Tianlan's tone was normal. At least so far, the power I have exerted has not surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. Chapter 955. There was a dim light in the underground base, which was so simple that it could even be said to have been picked up by others. On the surface, it was a barren mountain forest at the border of southern cloud and southern sky. The underground base was built in a hurry. In order to hide it, it was dug very deep, so the ventilation was not very good. The air was stuffy, with a hint of a faintly discernible stench. There were no extra staff. One of them used to be a gatekeeper of the base after retiring from scientific research, and the other was an apprentice of the gatekeeper. In addition to the master and apprentice, there was only a set of outdated life support equipment left in the base. What is this? Jianghu looked at the extremely old equipment in front of him with a look of disgust. His Majesty's eyes were also full of disgust, which was exactly the same as Jianghu's. But his expression was a little helpless. I'll make do with it. I hate the feeling of becoming a fool. Jianghu complained and said with a little pain in the ass, I feel sick when I think about it. His Majesty did not speak. He thought that even if he became a fool, it would happen after he came out of this set of equipment. What are you thinking about? Jianghu looked at him and raised his eyebrows. Don't you know what I'm thinking? His Majesty asked in reply and turned on the life support equipment in front of him. The equipment was a little outdated. It looked old and even a little dirty, but the inside was very clean. His Majesty pressed the button, and the sound of the equipment running rang out. The small cabin in front of them began to be filled with a black liquid. The liquid was increasing, and it looked like a piece of almost solidified darkness. His Majesty suddenly retched, turned to look at Jianghu, and said helplessly, what are you doing? Cut the crap. Jiang Shanyu resisted the desire to vomit, and his face was stiff. It's really nonsense, His Majesty murmured to himself. The distance between them was too close. When they stood together, not only did they know what each other was thinking, but they even felt the same. But if you don't talk, doesn't it look strange? Jiang Shanyu snorted, and his face became more and more ugly. Your willpower is too poor. This degree of sleep will make people uncomfortable, but it's nothing. And this time, it won't be long. Cut the crap. Jiang Shanyu glared at His Majesty and said angrily, you do it if you can. His Majesty nodded seriously and repeated, if you can do it, then go ahead. Jiang Shanyu paused. After a while, he gritted his teeth and said, now I want to kill you. If you can do it, then go ahead. Of course, His Majesty could sleep at this level. But then he had to fight Li Tianlan alone. Jiang Shanyu really couldn't do this kind of thing. There has been some progress in the laboratory. We will strive to develop the second generation of nutrient solution so that it won't be as disgusting as it is now. His Majesty said slowly, as for this base, it's really a little shabby, but we don't have much power here, so we can only make do. 3 days later, after the battle between me and Li Tianlan is over, you will be transferred to East Island as soon as possible. His Majesty was silent for a moment and said softly, if there are no accidents after the battle at the North Sea, it won't matter much whether or not we have new nutrient fluids. Jiang Shanyu looked at the thicker and thicker black liquid in the cockpit and took a deep breath subconsciously. The development of the Jiang family in this respect was completely different from that of the Wang family of Beihai. They couldn't be compared at all. Whether it was the foundation or the technology, they weren't at the same level. So naturally, the things they developed couldn't be perfect. This black nutrient solution could be said to be one of the most important things of the Jiang family now, codenamed Eternal Seal. This liquid, which was almost in a solid state, was the product of the Jiang family's targeted research for many years. It was also a drug specially developed for Jiang Shanyu and His Majesty. When Jiang Shanyu was dormant in the cabin, under the penetration of the Eternal Seal, the sensitivity of his body would be greatly reduced, forming a state similar to that of a vegetative person. The perfect combination of various drugs greatly strengthened his body when it was extremely slow. He and His Majesty were the same person. This kind of phenomenon that science couldn't explain would naturally have some facts that science couldn't explain. For example, the two people's thoughts could be synchronized within a certain distance. Another example was that within a certain distance, His Majesty could transfer a lot of the damage he suffered to Jiang Shanyu, who was temporarily sealed. In the same way, when Jiang Shanyu was asleep, his physical strength was greatly improved. His Majesty could also overdraft his body to suppress the toxins in his body, so as to exert the power close to the peak state. He and Jiang Shanyu were the same person. But from this point of view, it was equivalent to two individuals. His Majesty didn't know the result of the battle between him and Li Tianlan. But as long as Jiang Shanyu was asleep, he was invincible. After all, Jiang Shanyu had no poison in his body. Without poison, in the nutrient solution codenamed Eternal Seal, his physical strength was completely comparable to that of the peak of the invincible realm. In addition, with His Majesty's own physical strength, the two could bear his strength and the damage at the same time. It could almost easily break through the boundary of the peak of the invincible realm. This thing is so beautiful. His Majesty looked at the black liquid in the cockpit with some disgust, and his tone was a little emotional. After countless experiments and countless improvements, this was already the best result he could get. The only drawback was that Jiang Shanyu's body and mind would also be in an extremely slow state for a short period of time after he ended his sleep. His external performance was like an idiot. But in the state of sleep, the Eternal Seal could directly improve a person's physical endurance from the half-step invincible realm to the peak of the invincible realm. It was definitely a well-deserved masterpiece. This kind of masterpiece couldn't play any role in the hands of others, but in the hands of Jiang Shanyu and His Majesty, it was a real divine weapon. It was no exaggeration to say that before the poison of vermilion bird blood and black tortoise blood was solved, how powerful His Majesty could exert completely depended on the physical strength of Wuxia Xianxia in the state of sleep. The laboratory of the Jianghu family had never given up the study of the Eternal Seal. At present, there had been some results. The expected result of the second generation of the Eternal Seal was that the physical strength of Wuxia Xianxia in the state of sleep could break through the peak of the invincible realm. If this idea could succeed, His Majesty would exert the real combat capability at the peak state. I didn't imagine it. Wuxia Xianxia said directly. This sentence was a bit brainless. But at this moment, he completely felt the problem in His Majesty's heart. Just like many years ago, no one could imagine what the dark world would be without the Li family. Now the two of them had never imagined what the dark world would be without Dongxing Huangtu/Li Tianlan. That kind of dark world, His Majesty was silent for a long time before he whispered, that may not be what we want, but we can all be sure that we can get what we want in that kind of dark world. Wuxia Xianxia nodded and said, that's enough. There was a dull roar in the cockpit. All the equipment was started. Wuxia Xianxia turned to look at His Majesty and reached out his palm. Goodbye. Goodbye. His Majesty held his hand and said, go to sleep. When you wake up and meet again, we will be His Majesty in the dark world. Chapter 956. More than 2 years ago. Or in the past many years, when Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong of Zhongzhou State was healthy, every time he came to Yuzhou, as long as the itinerary was clear, a director would come to pick him up. There was no accident. Every time Wang Tianzong was picked up, it was the director of the Southeast Group. Only once, the president came in person, but it was still the director of the Southeast Group who came with the president. A long time ago, when Li Beidian gossiped with him about this, he sighed with emotion and said that this was the F*** card. Li Tianlan didn't quite understand it at that time. He just felt that it was meaningless to do so. It seemed to be useless except for showing off. It had been a few years since that conversation. Now Li Tianlan, who also had the same treatment, also understood the meaning of doing so. This was the second time he left Yuzhou since he was called His Majesty. The last time he returned to Xianyuan City, it was Zhou Mulan, the director of the giant group, who sent him off. This time, it was Dongxing Wudi who sent him back to Xianyuan City. This was also a small detail that Zhongzhou State and Emperor Dong's palace jointly maintained the stability of Zhongzhou State. Although such a farewell was of high standard, it would not be reported by the news, but people who should know would know. This meant that Emperor Dong's palace and the group controlled by it were still under the control of Zhongzhou State. The relationship between the two sides was still stable, and Emperor Dong's palace was also under the leadership of the parliament. It was a very simple signal, but an essential one. Gradually, Li Tianlan began to enjoy the treatment that Wang Tianzong had. In the conference room of the Hidden Dragon Sea, he could sit opposite Li watching. When entering and leaving Yuzhou, the director would personally pick him up. Similarly, in the past many years, every time Wang Tianzong was in Yuzhou, countless modern super firepower of Zhongzhou State would secretly aim at Beihai. Now, when Li Tianlan was in Yuzhou, countless weapons were also aimed at Xianyuan City. The subtlety of this was the real relationship between super forces like Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai and Zhongzhou State. It's good to leave today. The comrade from the Meteorological Bureau said that there will be a heavy snowstorm tonight, and it is estimated that all flights will be delayed tomorrow. Yuzhou has been very busy recently, and your identity is very sensitive now. It is not good for you to stay in Yuzhou for a long time. In the cold wind in the afternoon, the sky above Yuzhou Airport was slightly gloomy. The plane was doing the last check before takeoff. Dongxing Wudi stood in the cold wind and said in a calm tone, patting Li Tianlan's shoulder. It's not good for the parliament, is it? Li Tianlan laughed. Wang Tianzong seldom came to Yuzhou before. If there were no accidents, Li Tianlan would have fewer chances to come here in the future. It was not because it was a forbidden place, but because different identities represented different meanings. He was now Emperor Donghuang, and the new group had already taken shape. The giant group was fully supporting Li Tianlan to let him stand at the real peak, which also meant that there were few things he could not solve. It would be fine if he came to Yuzhou in private, but if he came with great fanfare, some people would inevitably think that he had something to communicate and negotiate with the parliament in private. No matter what it was, not many people would know. In this way, the longer he stayed in Yuzhou, the more uneasy the outside world would be. They would think that there were some unsolvable conflicts between Emperor Dong's palace and the parliament that needed Li Tianlan to waste time here. Even if he came here for nothing, just like this time, he didn't meet with Li Huaqing at all. But the outside world didn't know about it. It was impossible for the parliament to issue a statement saying that he came here for nothing and told everyone not to think too much. That would be too weak. It's the same for you, Dongxing Wudi said in a low voice, and his serious expression softened a little. Your identity is different now. You represent more than yourself. You must think more about what happens in the future. Heavenly Son, His Majesty, Leader. How nice it sounds. But how could it be so easy to do? Take Wang Tianzong for example. He seemed to be well off these years, but only he knew the pressure he was under. He was probably out of breath. But he was angry, wasn't he? In fact, if they had restrained themselves over the years and restrained themselves in some things, how could there be such a situation today? The nature of Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai are the same. Studying them can save you a lot of detours. In your current position, you can do anything you want, but there is not much you can really do. Slowly, you will understand that when a person can really be unscrupulous, that is when he really has nothing. Emperor Dong's palace and the two groups have power over the court and are as rich as a country. But behind them are the fate of countless people. I hope you can feel their real weight. To bear these, you need more than force. You also need prudence. Li Tianlan slowly put out the cigarette in his hand and gently flicked his fingers. Subtle sword energy flew out of his fingers and instantly broke the cigarette into powder invisible to the naked eye. His smile faded and he nodded slightly. I'm a little long-winded. Dongxing Wudi laughed at himself and said, in short, you can rest assured about the affairs in Yuzhou. Although we are old guys, none of us is willing to admit our age. We can handle things here for you. Tianlan, my only hope is that when you stand at the top and look at the world, you must not forget the cliff under your feet because of the beautiful mountains and rivers in front of you. I did some ridiculous things in my early years. Today, it seems that the result is good. Over the years, I have regretted it many times. But if I ask myself, if I can do it again, even if I know I will regret it, I will do it. But I will regret it eventually. Dongxing Wudi's eyes were a little complicated. He looked at the young man in front of him quietly. Dong Huang of the Dark World. The young majesty of Zhongzhou State. The current leader of the Li family. The young giant who stood at the top of the world in his early 20s. His own son. Dongxing Wudi patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder heavily. It seemed that he wanted to hide the sudden panic and uneasiness in his heart. He turned his head slightly and said hoarsely, no matter what happens in the future, it's good to be safe and alive. Li Tianlan took a deep look at him. It's a little strange, after thinking for a while, he said softly. Dongxing Wudi's body stiffened. In my memory, no one seems to have said this to me. Since I was a child, Grandpa has always asked me to rush to the highest place. Li Tianlan said softly, when I got to this position, Grandpa was gone. If he was still there, maybe he should have advised me to be cautious. I like this feeling very much. I will also remember these words. In fact, there is no need to regret anything, really. Since I was a child, I have thought that I have nothing to lose, so even today, I have never thought about what I have lost. What I see is what I have gained. The Li family is mine, and Emperor Dong's palace is mine. It's a little late, more than 20 years late, but now I have a father and a mother. Li Tianlan's smile was clear without any resentment or dissatisfaction. Now that I have parents, I don't want to lose you. The plane was ready to take off. Li Tianlan took a step forward and hugged Dongxing Wudi, who was a little stiff. Take care of yourself. He whispered, if I have time, I will go to Zhongyuan to see you. Let's go. He waved his hand and strode onto the plane. After a short wait, the plane slowly entered the runway. It started, sprinted, rushed into the sky, and went further and further away. Dongxing Wudi had been standing there and watching, just watching all the time. When he finished the 6th cup of coffee, he, who had been sitting quietly in the cafe all afternoon, ate the last piece of cake. He narrowed his eyes and saw the helicopter roaring overhead. It went over and approached the nearby majestic castle like a mountain. He watched silently, watching the helicopter descend and disappear from his sight, and finally smiled softly. "Waiter." He called out calmly. "Sir, what can I do for you?" A young, dark-skinned waiter in uniform walked over and said respectfully, "I need a pen and a blank sheet of paper," he said softly. The waiter was stunned, handed him the ballpoint pen with both hands, said, "Wait a minute," and turned to take a blank notebook from the backstage. He said thank you, tore a blank sheet of paper from the notebook, and handed it to the waiter with a tip of 100 Zhongzhou dollars. He said with a smile, "One sheet is enough. I'm very satisfied with your service." Without waiting for the waiter to respond, he had picked up the pen, lowered his head, and seemed to be thinking about what to write. The waiter left without a sound. The ballpoint pen in his hand began to slide on the white paper, and quickly turned into 2 simple lines of small characters. He put down the ballpoint pen, looked at the content on the paper, and shook his head slightly. "I wanted to write something pretentious. My literary talent is too poor." He, who seemed to be shrouded in a starry cloud, sighed, stood up, and turned to look at the huge castle standing under the sky not far away. The sun was about to set in Xianyuan City. He shook his head regretfully after making sure that he really couldn't write a mighty and domineering letter of challenge. The setting sun fell. The lights were on. At the moment when day and night alternated, he flicked his fingers casually. With a faint sound, the piece of paper in his hand that had been torn somewhat neatly disappeared in an instant. Boom! In an instant, a small half of Xianyuan City heard an extremely violent thunder. On the lawn in front of the castle, Li Tianlan, who had taken the plane from Yuzhou to Nanyun, and then back to Xianyuan City, suddenly looked back the moment he got off the plane. In his sight, the sky seemed to darken in an instant. The lights of Xianyuan City shone and refracted in the darkness. Outside Emperor Dong's palace, a solidified domain that Li Tianlan had never seen before took shape in the blink of an eye. The violent domain swallowed all the light and turned into an exaggerated whirlpool of thousands of meters in the distant sky. The whirlpool was expanding rapidly, covering the entire Emperor Dong's palace in an instant. At this moment, everyone in Emperor Dong's palace subconsciously raised their heads and looked at the sky. As far as the eye could see, the sky had been completely distorted by the majestic domain. The space was shaking wildly. Under the absolute pressure, a white light rushed from the whirlpool to Li Tianlan unhurriedly. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed slightly. At first glance, he saw that it was a piece of white paper. The most ordinary piece of white paper. The white paper flew all the way from thousands of meters away and accelerated wildly in the domain that distorted the sky. Like a meteor, it directly crashed into Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan, who was expressionless, stretched out his hand. The meteor directly crashed into Li Tianlan's hand. It was completely silent. The domain that covered thousands of meters in the sky suddenly disappeared. Li Tianlan's arm shook. Saint and Lin Yuxian, who were beside him, were directly retreated by a huge force at the same time, and their bodies were unstable. Li Tianlan was motionless, looking down at the white paper in his hand quietly. The white paper that flew thousands of meters did not deform at all. It was neat and tidy. The handwriting on the white paper was extremely clear and straightforward. "You didn't choose to be our friend. Then, we are enemies. 3 days later, in Emperor Dong's palace, we will fight to the death." Li Tianlan gently rubbed the paper with his fingers, narrowed his eyes, and did not speak for a long time. Chapter 957. The raging sky quieted down without a sound. The sky was still black, but the night returned to its beauty and tranquility. The extremely fast moment just now was like an illusion that everyone had experienced. The only difference was that there was a piece of white paper in Li Tianlan's hand. Li Tianlan lowered his head and looked at it silently. This letter of challenge was not formal, and the wording was very casual, but the way it was delivered was shocking. Only a true expert would be able to determine how terrifying that moment was. Your Majesty, this is, Saint, who was knocked back nearly 10 meters by the huge impact, walked over slowly. He glanced at the content of the white paper, and his face was extremely serious. A letter of challenge. Li Tianlan looked calm. He loosened his palm casually, and the letter of challenge fell from his hand. Before it fell to the ground, it had been broken into countless pieces. This person, Saint frowned tightly and muttered to himself. This person is a little interesting. Li Tianlan said casually, if I'm not mistaken, this should be the hidden master of the Jiang family. I was sure of his identity after reading the content of the letter of challenge. Because the night Jiang Shangyu went to the sanatorium, he asked me whether I would choose to be his friend or enemy. He walked slowly to the castle and said slowly, I just got off the plane, and the letter of challenge came. It's really fast. Your Majesty, the strength of the other party is not at the peak of the invincible realm. Saint, who was by his side, said word by word. He was also in the invincible realm. Although his realm had not been completely stabilized, if he was at the peak of the invincible realm, he would not have been directly swept away by the aftermath of a letter of challenge. No matter how big the gap between the peak of the invincible realm and the ordinary invincible realm was, it could not be so big. With only a letter, he drove the area thousands of meters above Emperor Dong's palace. This kind of strength had completely broken through the limit of the peak of the invincible realm. Yes. Li Tianlan nodded and said, the information collected by military counselor is right. The other party can be said to be one of the strongest masters I have ever met. If we only talk about the masters in the field, he is the strongest. Li Tianlan had seen many masters. Wang Tianzong, who was supreme in Kendo, Lin Fengting and Li Guangtu, who were also in the field of Kendo. Together with himself, there was no doubt that he was the representative figure of Kendo in that era. Domain-type expert, he had seen many of them and even killed a few, such as Jiang Qinyan and Jiang Qiansong of the Jiang family of South America, Cass Rotter and Moraid, the former god of war of Star State, Paul of the Shadow Throne, and Gu Xingyun's sword formation. He had seen many similar experts, but he had never felt that any of them could represent the martial arts of this era. Until today, until just now. The domain that appeared and disappeared in an instant had become unbelievably sturdy. In a sense, it was no longer a domain, but a world. He had completely integrated his domain with heaven and earth, achieving the oneness of heaven and man. If he fought in this kind of domain, he could make himself unaffected, but it was also difficult for him to break such a domain in a short time. Li Tianlan could roughly determine the opponent's realm and combat capability, but he hadn't had the experience of fighting with a similar opponent. The momentum of the domain just now was amazing, but the domain dissipated too fast. The opponent still hid many things that he didn't want him to see. The only thing Li Tianlan could be sure of was that it was relative to the domain of the peak invincible realm, similar to Gu Xingyun's after breaking through the peak invincible realm. There had been some unexpected changes in the powerful domain. The opponent was indeed a somewhat tricky opponent. Your Majesty, do you want to accept this challenge? Saint asked in a low voice. I have no possibility of refusing. Li Tianlan said calmly. He was Dong Huang now. He was His Majesty. He was invincible in the world. He was the chosen one of this era. In this position and this height, it was impossible for him to retreat even a little. He had to accept this challenge. Even if he retreated a little, he would be regarded as cowardice by outsiders. Anyway, we will meet in the final battle in Beihai. Compared with seeing through the opponent's details at that time, it is undoubtedly better to see the opponent's means 3 days later. Li Tianlan paused and said slowly, besides, I think after tonight, the whole dark world will know that someone will challenge me 3 days later. I have put myself in such a high position. It is easier said than done to come down. Saint wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, stood in front of the castle gate, and glanced at the surrounding night sky. Countless sword qis suddenly shot out in all directions with him as the center. The sword light was majestic and wanton, flying like a waterfall. The awe-inspiring sword light rushed out of Emperor Dong's palace in an instant and rushed through the street outside Emperor Dong's palace. At this moment, within the range of the sword energy, because everyone's state appeared clearly in Li Tianlan's perception. Most people behaved normally, but they felt that the surrounding temperature seemed to suddenly become a little colder. In different directions, there were also a few people who were pale and didn't dare to move, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth, and his awe-inspiring voice almost rang through the whole city. Get out of here. Do an investigation tonight. Li Tianlan glanced at Saint and said, drive out some people who are suspected to be from other forces. Okay. Saint nodded expressionlessly. As a new force and city, some mechanisms of Xianyuan City and Emperor Dong's palace were not perfect. Naturally, other forces in the dark world would not let go of the opportunity. In Xianyuan City, there were songs and dances, but there were always undercurrents around Emperor Dong's palace. No one knew how many pairs of eyes were secretly watching every move of Emperor Dong's palace. Before, Emperor Dong's palace didn't care about these things at all. For more than 2 years, there was nothing shameful about their every move. Occasionally, when they went too far, Li Beidian and Lin Yuxian would circle around and kill a few people, but they didn't kill them all. The existence of these people let them publicize some things, which was tantamount to improving the prestige of Emperor Dong's palace. Now that Li Tianlan was back, it could be said that Emperor Dong's palace really started to operate to create a dynasty in the dark world. Naturally, Li Tianlan would not allow some rats hiding in the dark with bad intentions around him. The only way was naturally to kill them all. Li Tianlan looked at the huge castle in front of him and suddenly shook his head. I won't go in. His eyes paused on Li Shi, and he seemed to be a little hesitant. Li Shi seemed to understand something and said slowly, let me walk with you. No need. Li Tianlan smiled and shook his head. It's not necessary. Your Majesty, you, Saint said. Arrange their accommodations. Li Tianlan said blandly, I'll go to Heaven Capital to have a look. After a pause, he said lightly, my Heaven Capital. His body flickered slightly. A dazzling sword light suddenly rushed up in Emperor Dong's palace. The shining sword light cut through the night, disappeared in an instant, and rushed directly to the south. Heaven Capital in Tiannan. That was the current headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Chapter 958. Before the rise of Emperor Dong's palace, Tiannan had been peaceful for more than 2 years. And it was foreseeable that even if Li Tianlan had returned to Xianyuan City and Emperor Dong's palace were still in the initial stage of accumulation. Emperor Dong's unimaginable wealth needed to be digested slowly. Mount Shu, Sai City, Jade Pool, and the most complicated Flourishing Age Fund and Samsara Palace also needed to be integrated slowly. The young people of Emperor Dong's palace also needed time to grow up. These things looked complicated, but in fact, they were not so messy. Situ Cangyue, Dongqing Wudi, and Qin Weibai were here. Most importantly, Li Tianlan was here. This also meant that the integration process of various forces by Emperor Dong's palace might be complicated, but there would be no trouble or undercurrents. What Emperor Dong needed most now was time. Time to slowly digest these results. Judging from the assets and hidden resources of several superpowers, Emperor Dong didn't need to expand at all. As long as he digested the forces of Sai City, Mount Shu, Jade Pool, and Samsara Palace, with the establishment of the new group, Emperor Dong could already become one of the largest superpowers in Zhongzhou State and even the whole dark world. In other words, it was more beneficial for Emperor Dong's palace to keep a low profile than to expand in a high profile. Everyone could see this clearly. Naturally, Li Tianlan could understand it as well. So everyone could be sure that at least for the time being, the development of Emperor Dong's palace might not directly affect the pattern of Tiannan. Before Emperor Dong's palace was truly integrated, the young Emperor Dong would not rush to rule Tiannan. Because he needed time. This was indeed a simple matter of time for Emperor Dong's palace. But for other forces in Tiannan, as long as the day when Emperor Dong completely ruled Tiannan did not come, they still had a chance to turn the tables. No one could see where the opportunity was for the time being, but no one would deny that it did not exist either. Think optimistically, what if Emperor Dong died one day? After all, the Supreme Sword Emperor of Jianghu State could be killed by a sword. The growing heavenly sun might not be without accidents. Without Emperor Dong's palace, Tiannan was still their Tiannan, a Tiannan that became richer and even madder because of the existence of Emperor Dong. Over the past 2 years, Tiannan had experienced occasional turbulence in the dark, but most of the time it had been calm. Emperor Dong's palace had risen around them, and Li Tianlan had returned. So far, no force had withdrawn from Tiannan. Everyone was thinking about how to destroy Emperor Dong's palace and divide its property, but no one took any action. Calm. It was calm and peaceful. In the southernmost part of Tiannan, the 2 cities controlled by the Burning Legion were very calm. In the northernmost part of Tiannan, Ningbian City, which was occupied by the Freedom Corps, had begun to secretly prepare to merge with Shenyuan City. The 2 cities were equally harmonious. Freedom City, which was located in the middle of Tiannan, was a city where countless forces in the dark world gathered. It was a little chaotic, but it was only relatively speaking. Each force was more controlled, and there were no large-scale conflicts. Sky Capital City, which was at the same level as Liberty City, was even more stable and silent. More than 2 years ago, the Purgatory of Heaven capital gradually withdrew from East Island, took root in Tiannan, and renamed the city Sky Capital City. The forces of the Purgatory of Heaven capital gradually gathered, drove out all the other forces in the city, and began to keep a low profile as their headquarters. Today, the Purgatory of Heaven capital still had a lot of forces in East Island, but it was far from what it was 2 years ago. Its headquarters was in Tiannan, and instead of returning to Jianghu State, it also left East Island. Such an action made both Jianghu State and East Island dissatisfied, but it didn't touch the bottom line of either side. From the national point of view, both Jianghu State and East Island hoped to make Li Kuangtu, a super combat force, and the huge force of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, a part of them. 2 years was not a long time, and both sides were still waiting for Li Kuangtu's choice. Sky Capital City was quiet and depressing at night. Compared with the rapidly developing Shenyuan City, the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital in Tiannan did not invest too much. When this place was not called Tiannan but belonged to Annan State, it was not a developed area in the relatively backward Annan State, and its development was extremely backward. Although it was called a city, a county, or even a more developed town in Jianghu State looked more prosperous than this place. Li Kuangtu changed the name of the city, but he basically didn't change the facilities here. The magnificent sky-reaching pavilion that once appeared in East Island's Heaven capital was gone forever. The Purgatory of Heaven capital delineated an area in the center of the new Sky Capital City, and the plan was done casually. It was simple and pragmatic, striving to be safe and airtight, without any luxury. The headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital was located in an area about half the size of a small town in the city center. Only the elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital could go in and out of the headquarters area freely, and no forces and civilians were allowed to approach. In fact, there were very few other forces and civilians here. The major forces would not give up their attention to the Purgatory of Heaven capital. But as the chaos in Snow Country grew longer and longer, people became more and more uncertain about Li Kuangtu's state. After daybreak entered the Invincible Realm, almost no one came to Heaven capital to attack. The most important thing was that this was not Shenyuan City, and the Purgatory of Heaven capital had almost no investment here, so there was not much value in plotting. Now the personnel of other forces who stayed here were very complete, but they were also very few. Each organization basically had only 1 or 2 people staying here to monitor the situation of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. As for civilians, there were even fewer here. When this place still belonged to Tiannan, it was a relatively lively city compared to Ningbian and Tunan. The permanent population was also more than that of the 2 cities in the north, about 200,000 people. As this area was named Tiannan, a considerable number of people fled back to Annan, and some went to the area controlled by the Burning Legion. When Xianyuan City was officially established and developed more than 2 years ago, most of the people who stayed here went to Xianyuan City. They were destined to have a hard time getting the right to live in Xianyuan City. But it was a city that was developing and expanding all the time, and there was no lack of resources and money. So they thought that there were enough job opportunities there, and at least they could eat their fill. The remaining small number of people went to Freedom City. Compared to the lifeless Sky Capital City, which had no desire to develop and had forcibly seized a large amount of land and food, Freedom City, where the major forces were in conflict with each other, had the opportunity to eat their fill compared to Sky Capital City. As a result, Heaven Capital was even more desolate. According to rough statistics, there were only about 40,000 people in Heaven Capital, of which nearly 30,000 belonged to the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, and nearly 3,000 had now become the peripheral force of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The rest were basically people who had nowhere to go or had no nostalgia for life. Vagrants, gamblers, drunkards, drug addicts, prostitutes. These people wandered around the periphery of Heaven Capital like walking corpses. Overall, the whole Heaven Capital was like a city with a lifeless interior and a city full of negative emotions outside. Corruption, depravity, madness, greed, ugliness, darkness. Outside the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, there seemed to be strong negative energy all the time. But Phoenix still liked it here. These 2 years were the happiest time of her life. She was pregnant and had a child. She was a little weak, but she would still often accompany her. Her man and child were growing up little by little. The situation was slowly stabilizing, and the atmosphere was gradually calming. Every day here was the happiest time for her. She liked Li Kuangtu for many, many years. In order to follow in Li Kuangtu's footsteps, she, who was not talented, became a superior of the half-step invincible realm and became one of the first 3 high-level people of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. In order to make Li Kuangtu look at her more, she used all means. She did many tasks that others didn't want to do, and killed many people that others didn't want to kill. For decades, Li Kuangtu secretly lurked in East Island. Phoenix's hands were full of blood, not only the blood of the enemy, but also the blood of her own people. So even inside the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, many senior superiors didn't like her existence. At least she could clearly feel that Dawn, who had a similar status to her, had wanted to kill her more than once. Phoenix didn't care about these. The crazy state of treating a man as everything made her almost fearless. So for more than 20 years, she became the best sword in Li Kuangtu's hand. In terms of combat capability, Phoenix was not as good as Dawn Daybreak, but she was indeed the best. It was just that this sword had extremely strong feelings. So when the Purgatory of Heaven Capital entered the human world, when Li Kuangtu brought Princess Ziyu back to East Island, but Ziyu couldn't get pregnant, on a special day, she found Li Kuangtu and said that she didn't want to be his best sword, but his best woman. Li Kuangtu, who lost his son, was extremely paranoid at that time, so he didn't refuse Phoenix's request. The pregnancy seemed to be going well. But what was difficult was that Phoenix had made countless preparations before that. The chaos in Snow Country broke out. Her and Li Kuangtu's son was born. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital came to Tiannan. Everything completely calmed down. During the recovery period, Li Kuangtu often accompanied Phoenix, took care of her mood, and spoiled their child. She let go of her martial arts and her power in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. She gradually felt Li Kuangtu's gentleness. In the past 2 years, she seemed to have changed from a good tool to a real woman. In the peaceful time in Tiannan, she, Li Kuangtu, and her child were like the most ordinary family of 3. It was just that such good days seemed to have an end. When Li Kuangtu left Heaven Capital for more than 3 days, although Phoenix no longer managed the specific affairs of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, she could still clearly feel the changes in the atmosphere inside the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The first to disappear was Li Kuangtu. Then dawn began to disappear with a large number of elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Tiannan was still calm. But the Purgatory of Heaven capital had begun to stir. Phoenix began to feel restless. In just a few days, she had woken up from her dreams several times. She had asked Li Kuangtu. But Li Kuangtu seemed to have really regarded her as his own woman and protected her very well, so he didn't say anything to her. Phoenix didn't know what Li Kuangtu wanted to do this time. But she knew Li Kuangtu's ultimate goal very well. She could also understand why he casually set up the headquarters in Heaven Capital and let Heaven Capital continue to decay. Because Li Kuangtu had never wanted to stay in Heaven Capital for a long time. His ultimate goal, the headquarters of his ideal Purgatory of Heaven Capital, was Xinyuan City. It had always been. From another perspective, this goal was to kill Li Tianlan, which was what Li Kuangtu wanted to do most now. Chapter 959. When he woke up from the nightmare once again, it was still a quiet and unchanging night outside the window. There seemed to be neat but light footsteps quietly walking in the distance, strictly guarding every corner of the vicinity. Phoenix, with a pale face and a cold sweat, sat on the bed in a daze. After a long while, she picked up her phone and looked at her watch. It was 10:23 in the evening. It had been less than an hour since she fell asleep. Phoenix subconsciously glanced at her side. The familiar and eager man was no longer there. Only a baby, who looked about 2 years old, was lying beside her. His hands and feet were wide open, and his breathing was even and quiet. Phoenix reached out her hand and gently touched the baby's soft face. She watched him reach out his chubby little hand and move it. A smile appeared on her pale face, and then she took a deep, deep breath. In the dream, it was a strange space. All kinds of lights filled all senses. The surrounding buildings were blurry, but the crowd was extremely clear. Chi controlling, ice condensing, fire flaming, thunder shocking, the light of martial arts of various realms rendered the world in the dream into various colors. The domain of the invincible realm and the sword light crisscrossed. The chaotic explosions and roars kept ringing in his mind. There were figures everywhere. There were corpses everywhere. Blood was everywhere. The twisted faces roared as they charged in the same direction. In that direction, sword chi soared into the sky, crazily circling around, and the crowd kept falling. The people behind pressed forward without hesitation. Death and life bloomed violently in the sharp sword light. Corpses were everywhere, and blood flowed like a river. But from the beginning to the end, no one retreated. The sword light turned from strong to weak in a very short time. A figure in the middle of the crowd was covered with blood. Countless weapons pierced into every corner of his body. Blood flowed, the sword energy disappeared, and the figure clearly appeared in the dream. That was Li Kuangtu's face. At that moment, Phoenix woke up with a start and subconsciously covered her wildly beating heart. Over the past few days, she had had several similar dreams. She didn't know why, although she had been telling herself to be optimistic, there was always a very pessimistic idea in her subconscious. In fact, when she was with Li Kuangtu many times, she had hinted to him that she said the Purgatory of Heaven capital. In fact, it was already very good now. There was no need to pursue other things. She said that looking at the current Purgatory of Heaven capital, she was already very satisfied. She said that as long as he could be safe, even if the Purgatory of Heaven capital did not exist, it did not matter. Li Kuangtu never expressed his stance. This silence lasted for more than 2 years until he suddenly left Heaven Capital City and went to Yuzhou from Xianyuan City, and then lost contact with her. Only then did Phoenix understand that Li Kuangtu didn't listen to anything she said. His heart had always been extremely firm, resolutely doing what he thought he should do. Phoenix pulled out her mobile phone. After a moment of hesitation, she dialed Li Kuangtu's number. "Sorry, the number you have dialed is unavailable. the cold voice sounded again and again, from Chinese to English. Feeling a little annoyed, she took out her phone, hesitated for a moment, and called Daybreak directly. The phone rang for a moment before it was picked up. Daybreak said hello. Tomorrow? After a brief silence, the phoenix slowly spoke. Daybreak was silent for a moment, and then said slowly, to be exact, we will leave in 2 hours. Phoenix was slightly surprised. So soon? There was an accident. An hour ago, as soon as Li Tianlan returned to Emperor Dong's palace from Yuzhou, someone sent a letter of challenge to Li Tianlan. At present it is not clear who the challenger is, but the other party showed the strength beyond the peak of the invincible realm in an instant. This matter has now spread throughout the dark world, and everyone's eyes are focused on Xianyuan City. This is a good opportunity. I will leave Tiannan for East Island as soon as possible. Daybreak said the news that could not be hidden in any way, and his tone was a little alienated. What's the matter? Come to me. Phoenix looked at the sleeping child beside her and lowered her voice. I have something to ask. Daybreak did not speak for a moment, as if thinking about how to refuse, but finally agreed. Okay, I'll be right there. Although it was close to midnight, and any single man who approached Li Guangtu's woman would attract some suspicious eyes, Daybreak was undoubtedly not one of them. In the purgatory of Heaven Capital, he was the only superior of the invincible realm besides Li Guangtu, the real second in command, and also Li Guangtu's brother. He was absolutely trusted, and Daybreak did not need to worry about many things. The reason why he did not want to come was that he did not want to see Phoenix. Phoenix silently, she hung up the phone and was in a daze for a while. Then she found a more conservative pajamas and put them on. She bent down and kissed her son. Seeing that he showed no sign of waking up, she quietly got out of bed, went from the bedroom to the living room, and waited quietly. In less than 5 minutes, there was a knock on the door from outside. Phoenix pressed a button beside her hand, and the door opened automatically. Daybreak walked in. Haven't rested yet? He sat opposite Phoenix and asked in a casual tone. I slept and woke up. Phoenix's voice was faint. She paused and smiled bitterly. I've been a little uneasy these days, and I've been having nightmares. I feel that His Highness will be in danger. Can you tell me where he is now? Don't worry. Daybreak looked at her for a while and said slowly, I know His Highness's strength very well. Even if there's any danger, he can escape unscathed. You, Phoenix carefully probed, are you going to participate in the final battle in Beihai? I don't know. Daybreak answered without hesitation, my task is to go to East Island. As for His Highness, when I last talked to him, he was still in Yuzhou. I don't know where he is now. Maybe he's in East Island. His tone was very formal, but Phoenix still heard the perfunctory tone in it. Phoenix had a complicated look in her eyes. Or, the one who appeared in Xianyuan City tonight to challenge Li Tianlan is His Highness? Definitely not. Daybreak was speechless. You think too much. His Highness is not that bored. Although he has the strength, according to His Highness's character, hiding in the dark is his favorite. But this challenge has indeed attracted a lot of attention. We can transfer more people to East Island while everyone's attention is diverted. Heaven Capital of East Island, Daybreak's eyes dimmed, and he said softly, I don't like that country, but I really miss the sky-reaching pavilion in Heaven Capital of East Island. His Highness's intention this time is also very simple. To regain control of the dark forces in East Island, that's our bottom line. Phoenix looked at him for a while, and suddenly asked, who will go to East Island with you this time? Daybreak was stunned and didn't speak for a while. Give me a list. Phoenix's tone was a little tough. Daybreak hesitated for a while, and then slowly nodded. Okay. Chapter 960. The so-called name list was really just a piece of paper filled with names that looked somewhat densely packed. Daybreak had been carrying it with him, and the creases were all new. Obviously, before coming here, Daybreak had been studying the list in his hand. Phoenix took the list and looked at it carefully, and it was a little hard. In the past 2 years, she had been focusing on her child and Li Kuangtu, and she had not been involved in the specific affairs of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. As a giant with the foundation of a superpower, no matter how peaceful the dark world was, there would always be people coming to the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Not to mention that the dark world was far from peaceful in the past 2 years. The Purgatory of Heaven capital had expanded a little in the past 2 years and absorbed some newcomers, so there were some names on the list that Phoenix had never heard of. She tried hard to guess the strength they had from some familiar names, and then combined the strength of these people. It was probably the total strength of the Purgatory of Heaven capital that would go to East Island. This kind of speculation was certainly not accurate, but it could not be said to be completely outrageous. Phoenix's brows gradually furrowed. These people. Daybreak looked at Phoenix quietly, his eyes deep. Phoenix wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In the end, she didn't say much. According to the configuration on the list, combined with her memory of the internal structure of the Purgatory of Heaven capital more than 2 years ago, the number of people going to East Island this time was about 5,000 to 7,000. Daybreak of the Invincible Realm led the team, Dawn of the Half-Step Invincible Realm assisted him, followed by 5 people at the peak of the Thunder-Shocking Realm and 12 superiors of the Thunder-Shocking Realm. These 19 people formed the high-end lineup of the expedition to East Island. Except for Daybreak and Dawn, among the remaining 17 people, 14 were acquaintances of Phoenix, and only 3 were newcomers who joined the Purgatory of Heaven capital in the past 2 years and were loyal and trustworthy. Phoenix had a deep understanding of most of them. Their combat effectiveness was not exaggerated, but the most important thing was their loyalty. These people could be said to be absolutely loyal to Li Kuangtu inside the Purgatory of Heaven capital. They were also the elders of the Li family who first came to the Purgatory of Heaven capital from Li Honghe after the collapse of the Li family. In other words, if the Li family and the Purgatory of Heaven capital had to be separated, these people were undoubtedly pure people of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. What are you guarding against? Phoenix raised her eyebrows slightly. She looked down from the top of the list. After the Thunder-Shocking Realm were the experts of the Fire-Flaming Realm, and a large part of the experts at the peak of the Fire-Flaming Realm were also the seniors of the Li family. These people were not absolutely loyal to Li Kuangtu, but they were irreplaceable to the core of the Li family. Every name in front of her could be said to be a trustworthy person. Emperor Dong's palace will probably go to East Island as well. Daybreak said blandly, if they really show up, the situation will become very complicated. So what His Highness means is, don't take those who are indecisive and don't know their own position. Don't take those who go to East Island to fight. Don't take those who don't dare, don't take those who don't want to fight. Although there aren't many of them, there's no doubt about their ability to execute. At the critical moment, no matter who they're facing, as long as it's not their own people, they'll dare to make a move. Phoenix was silent for a while and sighed softly. I've never understood why we have to go against Emperor Dong's palace and why we have to be enemies with Li Tianlan. Daybreak seemed to be stunned. He gave the Phoenix a strange look and smiled. I can't believe you would say something like that. Phoenix's body stiffened slightly. She looked down and said, you're mocking me, aren't you? Daybreak looked at her and smiled quietly, without saying anything. Why did they have to go against Emperor Dong's palace? Why did they have to be enemies with Li Tianlan? 2 years ago, the Phoenix was the one who did the most of these things. Many elders in the Li family were dissatisfied with Li Kuangtu's various disdain and contempt for Li Tianlan. Many elders didn't want the Li family and the Purgatory of Heaven capital to split. When the voices below grew to a certain extent, as a leader, Li Kuangtu had only 2 choices. The first was to compromise, and the second was to be tough to the end. Li Kuangtu was not a person who would compromise. So Phoenix became the best sword in his hand. The strength of the half-step invincible realm was enough to deal with internal problems. To put it bluntly, a part of the Li family was loyal to Li Tianlan. Those who really regarded Li Tianlan as young master died in the hands of Phoenix. At that time, she thought that the Li family was the Purgatory of Heaven capital, and the Purgatory of Heaven capital was the Li family. At that time, she thought that Li Tianlan didn't deserve the title of heir of the Li family at all. Only Li Guangtu was the legitimate heir of the Li family. At that time, she thought that Li Tianlan would be killed sooner or later. Such a person who had become extremely paranoid under the influence of Li Guangtu now asked why she wanted to be enemies with Li Tianlan. I know I'm not qualified to ask this question. Phoenix was silent for a long time, then took a deep breath and said slowly, but today is different from the past. I'm a woman, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. I admit that I'm afraid. If Li Tianlan was just a thundershocking realm expert, or even a half-step invincible realm expert, I wouldn't change my mind. But now it's different. Li Tianlan is different, and so is Emperor Dong's palace. I know Li Tianlan's achievements and the strength of Emperor Dong's palace now. It's no exaggeration to say that in terms of strength, we are no match for Li Tianlan. Emperor Dong's palace has been established for a short time, but it doesn't mean that it's weak. We can forget about Sai City, Mount Shu, the giant group, and even the Samsara Palace. Today, Li Tianlan, with the help of the Flourishing Age Fund, is already stronger than us. The Purgatory of Heaven capital looks strong now, and our strength is no worse than most superpowers. But this does not include Li Tianlan. Because you and I, and even His Highness, are not completely sure how much of the Purgatory of Heaven capital's power will belong to us and how much will belong to Li Tianlan when the Purgatory of Heaven capital faces Li Tianlan. I'm afraid. We targeted Li Tianlan before because he was not a member of the Li family, but he became the heir of the Li family because of Senior Li's support. His existence will threaten His Highness's future layout. Besides, Li Tianlan hasn't grown up, so it's not difficult to kill him. Now it's different. We are no match for Emperor Dong's palace. At least, the odds of winning are not very big. So I think we should look at Emperor Dong's palace and Li Tianlan rationally. Really, there's no need to target him, and it's meaningless. Maybe the two of them will ease up and cooperate to some extent and develop together. That's the best. Phoenix said a lot. Her voice was slow, with a little confusion. Daybreak waited for him to finish and then simply said, naive. Phoenix bit her lower lip and didn't speak. When he was weak, we had a lot of reasons to deal with him. But because of Samsara Palace, it was hard for us to kill him. His Highness has always been afraid of the master of Samsara Palace. Facts have proved that she deserves everyone to retreat and be afraid of her. During the final battle of Heaven Capital, the master of Samsara Palace helped the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Do you think there's no price? At that time, the master of Samsara Palace made it clear that she wanted us to deal with the Wang family of Beihai with her. The chaos in Snow Country was actually planned when the master of Samsara Palace met Her Highness, or even earlier. The reason why His Highness agreed to the master of Samsara Palace was not only because he could get the grudges between East Island and the Wang family of Beihai, but also because in his expectation, the possibility of the master of Samsara Palace dying was almost 100%. In the chaos, no one could see the whole picture of the general trend. The hostile forces, the friendly forces, and the allies were all superficial. The Samsara Palace was destroyed, and the master of Samsara Palace died. If His Highness wasn't seriously injured, he would destroy the East Emperor Palace, kill Li Tianlan, and take all the power and resources of the Li family into his own hands. There are a lot of reasons to kill him. For example, he's not a member of the Li family and doesn't deserve to control the future of the Li family. For example, he has great potential. If he doesn't die, he will inevitably become a threat to the Purgatory of Heaven capital in the future. For example, because of Senior Li's preference for him, a large part of the Li family's people are in Li Tianlan's favor. For example, there are 100 reasons. But no one expected that Wang Tianzong would reach the supreme realm in the chaos. His Highness was seriously injured, and At that time, even if I entered the invincible realm and fought with Li Tianlan desperately, I was basically no match for him. What was even more unexpected was that Li Tianlan would grow so fast. Xinyuan Feng, the 13th floor, the power beyond the peak of the invincible realm, the power to kill ordinary invincible realm experts at will, all the resources of the giant group, the embryonic form of the new group, the internal intelligence and connections of the 6 groups that the Flourishing Age Fund got in advance, unimaginable money. One is Emperor Dong's palace with the foundation of a dynasty, and the other is the Wang family of Beihai. Daybreak's voice gradually deepened, and he finally sneered. I don't like you, and Dawn even wanted to kill you several times. We didn't touch you, not because we were afraid of you, but because we were loyal to His Highness. Over the years, you killed a lot of so-called traitors. In fact, those so-called traitors didn't do anything wrong. Those were all brothers who fought side by side with us in life and death. But His Highness needed them to die. What could we do? At that time, compared with the newly established East Emperor Palace, the Purgatory of Heaven capital was like a giant looking at a clown. So you weren't afraid at that time, and you didn't hesitate to kill people. At that time, no one would be afraid of Li Tianlan, who had just entered the secular world. If there was no Samsara Palace, he was a nonentity. Countless forces in the entire dark world have analyzed many times. According to the situation when Li Tianlan just entered the secular world, if there was no Samsara Palace, if he wanted to live, he could only let go of the past grievances and turn to the Wang family of Beihai or the Lin clan. Who would care about such a young man at that time? But now? Are you afraid? 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 Ha, you're afraid now? I'm afraid too, and so is His Highness. In Li Tianlan's current state, when he holds Xianyuan Feng, His Highness won't be his opponent. So what if he's afraid? Can you stop doing a lot of things if you're afraid? If you're Li Tianlan and I'm His Highness, when I'm strong, I want to kill you, but I can't. When you're strong, can we let go of the past grievances and get along well with each other? Naive, ridiculous, stupid, idiotic, silly. Daybreak opened his mouth but didn't spit out the letter in the end. Phoenix lowered her head and said nothing. So. The situation is obvious. Daybreak took a deep breath and said blandly, to deal with Li Tianlan, all the previous reasons are no longer reasons. Everything that Emperor Dong's palace has now is indeed what His Highness wants and desires, but it's not the main reason. In this case, there's only one reason to deal with Emperor Dong's palace, and that is self-protection. Do you understand? Self-protection, do you understand? Here, under our feet, is the complete Purgatory of Heaven capital and the complete Li family. A large number of masters, elites in all aspects, and the foundation and wealth left by the Li family are all here. Li Tianlan is the heir designated by Senior Li before his death. From this point of view, he is the legitimate heir of the Li family. Now he has Emperor Dong's palace. When Emperor Dong's palace becomes strong, do you think he will recognize the status of the Purgatory of Heaven capital? Will he live in harmony with the Purgatory of Heaven capital? To say the least, even if Li Tianlan doesn't do anything for His Highness, how much older is His Highness than Li Tianlan? Decades later, if His Highness is gone, what will happen to the Purgatory of Heaven capital? Daybreak stood up irritably, lit a cigarette, took a drag, and said coldly, decades later, maybe Li Tianlan's state will not decline. That is his most powerful peak. At that time, if His Highness is gone, believe me, Emperor Dong's palace doesn't need to do anything. A large number of people in the Purgatory of Heaven capital will take the initiative to pack up the Purgatory of Heaven capital and give it to Emperor Dong's palace. At that time, have you ever thought about what will happen to the children of you and His Highness? We can also assume that this situation will not happen. You can say that it will definitely not happen. But it hasn't happened and it won't happen are two different things. When it hasn't happened, can you really be sure of anything? You don't dare, and His Highness doesn't dare. Even if Li Tianlan is here, he can't guarantee anything. This kind of conflict can't be reconciled at all. It can only be a fight to the death. What about you? You actually want to live in harmony with Li Tianlan. Ha, if Li Tianlan hears this, he will probably die of laughter. Phoenix's face was pale, and countless emotions were fiercely rolling in the depths of her heart, with various flavors and extremely complicated feelings. I can tell you clearly that His Highness is indeed in Beihai now. The final battle in Beihai has been brewing for a long time, and all the ambitious forces will get involved. You don't know what this final battle means. From another perspective, the result of this final battle directly determines whose era the Dark World will belong to in the future. No one will miss such a grand event, even if it means a lot of blood and death. His Highness has protected you too well. If you're not stupid, you should know that you can't change anything. Think about your child. So, don't expect to live in harmony with Emperor Dong's palace. Everything you said just now, I'll take it as a joke. Well, it's very funny. Look, I laughed. Daybreak's voice was steady. He said he laughed, but in fact, there was no expression on his face at all. But a faint giggle really did ring out. The laughter was very light, very childish, with undisguised curiosity and innocence. Phoenix froze for a moment. Daybreak also froze for a moment. In the next second, the two's expressions changed drastically. That voice was so small, childish, and innocent. It was obviously the voice of a child, or a baby. There was a baby here. That was the child of Li Kuangtu and Phoenix, the only heir of the Purgatory of Heaven capital in the future. But the problem was that such a big child couldn't see his mother when he woke up. How could the voice be laughter? Phoenix's body exploded in an instant. She directly bounced up from the sofa and rushed to the bedroom. The invisible sword energy directly tore the door of the bedroom. The door silently turned into pieces on the ground. Phoenix stood at the door, maintaining the posture of rushing in, and her whole body froze in place. At this moment, her body was as numb as a sculpture, and her face was pale and frightened. An indescribable coldness directly enveloped her whole body. She froze there and stared at the soft bed in the bedroom, as if she had seen the most terrible thing. Daybreak rushed over in the next second. His eyes were fixed on the bed in the bedroom at the first moment. Then, his body also froze there. His scalp was numb. At this moment, Daybreak's whole body was numb. He opened his mouth, took a step forward, closed his mouth, and stopped. He looked like he didn't know what to do or what to say. The atmosphere in the bedroom was quiet and weird. In the sight of Phoenix and Daybreak, a young man in a long black windbreaker embroidered with golden patterns was sitting leisurely by the bed, reaching out a hand and teasing the baby on the bed. His face was calm. Calm without any emotion. The baby was lying on his back, holding one of his fingers with chubby hands, smiling happily. Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan. Why was he here? When did he come here? How did he get in? What did he want to do? Countless questions burst in Phoenix's mind in an instant, and her body trembled more and more violently. Heaven Capital, guarded by countless elites of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, had no blind spots. Phoenix of the half-step Invincible Realm and Daybreak of the Invincible Realm were in the living room. But Li Tianlan appeared in the bedroom silently. What did this mean? Just thinking about it was enough to make people shudder. Come in and sit down. Li Tianlan gently tapped the baby's soft face with his finger. He turned his head and glanced at the door casually. Phoenix swallowed hard and walked in carefully, as if she was afraid of stimulating Li Tianlan. Li. No, His Majesty East Emperor. Phoenix's voice trembled so violently that it sounded like she was crying. She was in a state of unprecedented fear. Because she understood Li Tianlan's strength, she particularly understood her son's fragility at this time. It looked like a picture of an ordinary adult and a baby, but in fact, it was like the gap between a giant and an ant. Perhaps with a little force unconsciously, her child's life might end in an instant. Phoenix's breathing became more and more rapid. He's a lovely child. Li Tianlan smiled. What's his name? Phoenix trembled and looked at Li Tianlan's fingers stroking the baby's face in horror, unable to speak. Li Huawu. Daybreak took a deep breath and walked to Phoenix's side. He said in a hoarse voice, Your Majesty, don't you think it's a little inappropriate for you to suddenly appear in the bedroom of the Mistress of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in the middle of the night? Chapter 961. Phoenix became extremely nervous in an instant. She stared at Li Tianlan's movements without blinking and even held her breath. Daybreak's question was very powerful, but in such a situation, it could only make people feel powerless. Li Tianlan laughed. Suitable? His voice was indescribably feminine in the dim light of the bedroom. I want to come here, so it's suitable here. Tell me, what's not suitable? Daybreak took a deep breath and sneered. Your Majesty is really domineering. But don't forget, this is not Emperor Dong's palace, but the purgatory of heaven capital. You're wrong. Li Tianlan said indifferently, this is the Li family. Can you deny that? Daybreak paused slightly. Li Tianlan's eyes were a little playful. Think it through before you speak. You'll die if you say something wrong. Daybreak closed his eyes and tried to calm himself down. After 2 or 3 minutes, he opened his eyes again and said calmly, Your Majesty, are you here to threaten the purgatory of heaven capital with this child? I'm not that bored, and he's not a person who will compromise, even if this is his son. Li Tianlan smiled sarcastically and gently flicked his fingers. The baby's small body slowly floated in the air and fell into Phoenix's arms under Daybreak's extremely nervous gaze. Phoenix subconsciously held her son tightly, her body slumped on the chair behind her, and she breathed heavily. So, Li Tianlan took a deep look at the baby and said calmly, Li Guangtu has gone to Beihai now? And he's going to deal with me? For the self-protection you said? He really didn't want to threaten Li Guangtu with this child. Li Guangtu's character meant that he would rather sacrifice everything than compromise. At this critical juncture, since Li Guangtu had decided to participate in the decisive battle in Beihai, he would certainly not retreat. The most important thing was that the child in front of him was the only grandson of the old man who raised him. No matter what, it was difficult for Li Tianlan to kill him. Daybreak's face was extremely ugly. He didn't expect that Li Tianlan would suddenly appear here. Moreover, he didn't know how long Li Tianlan had been here. It seemed that Li Tianlan had heard all the conversation between him and Phoenix just now, so that he had no way out now. He clenched his teeth tightly and remained silent. I'm just here to see how he's recovering. Li Tianlan smiled. Now it seems that even if he hasn't recovered to his peak state, he's not far from it, right? Daybreak still said nothing. Aren't you going to say something? Li Tianlan sat on the bed. The person who sent me the letter of challenge in Emperor Dong's palace tonight should have contact with you, right? Did he join hands with the purgatory of heaven capital? If it's just the purgatory of heaven capital, you may participate in the final battle of Beihai, but you absolutely have no other energy to worry about East Island. After a pause, he glanced at Daybreak and suddenly said, the first time we met was in East Island, right? The look in Daybreak's eyes became somewhat complicated. He nodded and said hoarsely, Your Majesty's memory is very good. You seem to have saved me. Li Tianlan sat on the bed, his body completely relaxed, and his eyes were a little unfocused. I don't know if you believe it or not, but at that time, I thought we could be friends, allies, and even our own people. At that time, we cooperated with the Samsara Palace, so we were naturally allies with His Majesty. Daybreak said quietly. I mean our own people. Li Tianlan looked at him quietly. I've never understood why you are so persistent in wanting to split the Li family. Until now, do you still think your surname is Li, Your Majesty? Daybreak asked in reply. My name is Li Tianlan. Shaking his head, Li Tianlan continued, Rushi and I are engaged. She is already my woman. The plan that sounded absurd back then, at least now seems to have no problem. Rushi will slowly recover, and we will have children. He will be the future patriarch of the Li family. This is also what Grandpa wants. He looked at Daybreak and said seriously, what's wrong with this plan? That kind of Li family is your Li family, just a puppet. Daybreak said softly. It's meaningless to argue. Li Tianlan said calmly, I'm not here today to discuss this. Contact him for me. Daybreak stared at Li Tianlan closely. His body was tense, as if he was ready to fight at any time. What if I refuse? It's meaningless to refuse. I already know where he is. It's just an ordinary call. Is it necessary to refuse? Li Tianlan laughed. Daybreak looked at Li Tianlan for a long time. He nodded slowly and said softly, "It makes sense. It makes sense." He took out his mobile phone, hesitated, and dialed Li Guangtu's secret number. The phone was quickly connected. Li Guangtu's indifferent voice sounded from the other end of the phone. "What's the matter?" "Your Highness." Daybreak hesitated and was still thinking about how to phrase it. Li Tianlan's voice had come over. "How's the scenery of Beihai?" On the other end of the phone, Li Guangtu suddenly fell silent. Li Tianlan reached out his hand, and Daybreak handed the phone to him. Li Tianlan switched the video mode casually. Li Guangtu's face appeared on the screen. His eyes were deep and quiet. The place where he was a little dark, and there was an obvious sound of waves. Li Tianlan looked at him quietly. The two looked at each other for a while, and Li Tianlan took the initiative to say, "Long time no see." Li Guangtu narrowed his eyes slightly. All kinds of subtle emotions flashed in the depths of his eyes, and finally turned into indifference. "You went to my house just to say long time no see?" "To see your state, and by the way, to see the current state of the purgatory of heaven capital." Li Tianlan said calmly, "I think it's time for me to take back the purgatory of heaven capital." "What do you think? Do you deserve it?" Li Guangtu sneered without hiding it. "You hide in other people's homes, and I do whatever I want in yours. You should ask yourself whether you deserve it or not." Li Tianlan's voice was flat and indifferent. "Do whatever I want, do whatever I want," Li Guangtu repeated it twice, and his whole person became more and more indifferent. "If you want to fight now, I can accompany you to the end. In heaven capital, you can do whatever you want. I only have one attitude." He looked at Li Tianlan with no expression. "If one person in the purgatory of heaven capital dies today, the whole Emperor Dong's palace will not have any peace in the future. I can't kill you, but I can't kill you. Anyone in Emperor Dong's palace, except for you, I can kill whoever I want." Li Tianlan looked at him quietly. There was an undisguised madness in Li Guangtu's indifferent eyes. "No matter what you want to do," Li Tianlan said lightly. Li Tianlan said faintly, "You should know that you can't succeed. If it were in the past, you might still have a chance, but you're too cautious. Maybe the treason case many years ago left a psychological shadow in you. You don't like any uncontrollable variables and always want to wait until the situation is perfect before you take action. But in fact, how can there be so many perfections?" Li Tianlan smiled. "If you hadn't been afraid of the Samsara palace and killed me directly, there wouldn't be so many troubles now. But you didn't dare to do it at that time. What can you do now? The situation is different." "So?" Li Guangtu asked expressionlessly. "Come back." Li Tianlan said calmly, "I can give you a chance. There is no need to make things too ugly. You come to Emperor Dong's palace, and the position of the first deputy palace lord is yours. The purgatory of heaven capital can be preserved. As the deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace, you can also continue to be the leader of the purgatory of heaven capital. The purgatory of heaven capital doesn't need to be integrated with Emperor Dong's palace, and it can still maintain a good independence. In the future, my child and Rushi can inherit the purgatory of heaven capital. If you have a different opinion, you can also let Huawu inherit the purgatory of heaven capital. Emperor Dong's palace and the purgatory of heaven capital will form a permanent alliance. What do you think?" Li Guangtu was silent for a long time. In all fairness, if Li Tianlan could do such a condition, it was really good. At least, most people in the purgatory of heaven capital could accept it. But in the end, under such circumstances, even if the purgatory of heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace formed an alliance in the future, there would be a primary and secondary relationship. The status of the two sides was basically impossible to be truly equal. so Li Kuangtu shook his head. Good condition, but I have a better choice. Still looking forward to the so-called final battle in North Sea? Li Tianlan's voice was deep. You will die. For my sake, don't force me to kill you. Don't say that. Li Kuangtu said lightly, the name of the Li family is actually not important anymore. Emperor Dong's palace and the purgatory of heaven capital have developed to this point. If the two sides go to war, there is only one goal, that is, interests. It's just that our relationship is subtle. The name of the Li family can make us devour each other faster after we destroy each other. Li Tianlan, you can't give up the interests of the purgatory of heaven capital. Similarly, I am also very jealous of your Emperor Dong's palace. Everything you have now is what I dream of. I want it, so I will take it. There is no need to talk about reason and right or wrong. Li Kuangtu took a deep look at Li Tianlan. See you in North Sea. With a clear sound, the video call was completely hung up. Li Tianlan sat on the bed, expressionless. An indescribable aura emanated from him little by little. The warm heaven capital seemed to begin to cool down in an instant. Daybreak's scalp was numb again. He didn't know what happened, but he clearly felt that the moment he hung up the phone, Li Tianlan became extremely terrifying. Your Majesty, you'd better remember that this is the purgatory of heaven capital. Daybreak said in a deep voice. This is the Li family. Li Tianlan replied blandly. He stood up, walked to the bedroom window, and looked at the deep night outside. The indescribable aura kept spreading from him. At this moment, he felt like he was in a nightmare that was about to be scared to wake up. Daybreak's hair all stood on end. I am very disappointed in you. Li Tianlan's deep voice echoed slowly. If he hadn't died in Linnan, he would have been very disappointed in you now. You want East Island, Emperor Dong's palace, and everything I have. The extremely terrifying aura kept spreading and diffusing. You have always said that I don't deserve. But have you ever thought that if you want to take away everything I have, do you deserve it? It was not the sword intent, not the power. It was a completely indescribable feeling. The whole space seemed to be slightly distorted. You can't get anything. Li Tianlan turned his back to Daybreak. He said in a low voice, we can't go anywhere. You. Daybreak's face was pale. Under the great pressure, his body was tense to the extreme, and he was about to attack with all his strength. Don't move. Li Tianlan said in a low voice. The indescribable aura became completely clear, and it directly wrapped Daybreak in it. It was not the sword intent, not the power. Vaguely, it was like a kind of energy driven by the sword energy. Daybreak's body was stiff on the spot. It was not that he didn't want to move, but he really couldn't. Li Tianlan, shut up. Li Tianlan said slowly. Daybreak's voice suddenly disappeared. He kept his eyes open, and his mouth kept opening and closing, but there was no sound. No one is my opponent now, not even Li Kuangtu. He said softly, as for you want to go to East Island? If I don't let you go, you can't go. Crack, above the headquarters of the purgatory of heaven capital, the indescribable aura spread to the extreme. The space was distorted to the extreme. In an instant, the dark night sky seemed to be completely torn apart by an extremely sharp blade. An incomparably dazzling and blazing white light appeared in the pitch-black sky. It was like a sudden flash of lightning. The white light spread wildly in the sky and instantly turned into the shape of a net. The dangerous and sharp white line completely lit up the night sky. The entire headquarters of the purgatory of heaven capital turned pale under the sudden flash of lightning. Daybreak's eyes were dull and his face was pale. At this moment, he finally felt this kind of energy. He also felt the incredible sword energy that drove this kind of energy. There were more and more white lightning above the sky. A large amount of light silently spread all over the sky. The sword energy above the ground had turned into an ocean in the blink of an eye. The dense sword energy covered every corner of the headquarters of the purgatory of heaven capital in an instant. Li Tianlan's figure was glowing. In the windless bedroom, his black windbreaker fluttered wildly in the wind. On the black windbreaker, the complex and profound golden patterns were flowing unscrupulously, emitting dazzling golden light. The vast and endless sword energy did not cover the entire heaven capital, but only the headquarters of the purgatory of heaven capital. The sword energy continued to gather in the headquarters, more and more, and finally rushed to the sky in an instant, blending with the white light above the sky. All the visions disappeared in an instant. Endless sword chi, boundless lightning, golden light, everything disappeared without a trace. It was as if everyone had experienced an illusion. Daybreak's body regained its freedom, but he did not dare to move. His voice trembled for the first time. "What did you do?" Li Tianlan seemed a little tired. He turned his head to look at Daybreak, and then at the purgatory of heaven capital in front of him. After a few seconds of silence, he whispered again, "I'm very disappointed in you." His figure gradually became illusory, fainter, transparent, and finally disappeared completely. Daybreak rushed out of the bedroom, the living room, and the courtyard at once. Li Tianlan had disappeared without a trace. Heaven and earth were still the same. However, he suddenly felt an endless pressure. Daybreak's face changed, and he rushed all the way. The gate of the headquarters of the purgatory of heaven capital was quiet. A team of elites on patrol passed by. Outside the gate, a team of elites who seemed to have just returned from drinking outside was talking and laughing as they walked to the gate. When they saw Daybreak standing at the gate, they were all stunned. Then they subconsciously bent down. But they didn't have time to speak. The moment they bent down, their bodies leaned forward, and their upper bodies seemed to touch an invisible boundary. The sword chi, which was as majestic as the ocean, suddenly soared into the sky. Several elites of the purgatory of heaven capital, who were standing at the gate and bending down, were instantly torn into two halves by the extremely sharp sword energy. Their upper bodies completely disappeared. The lower bodies outside the gate were still intact. Daybreak's body stiffened in place. It was not until this moment that he understood what Li Tianlan meant when he said that he wouldn't let them go. The entire headquarters of the purgatory of heaven capital had been completely blocked by Li Tianlan with sword energy. No one could enter or leave the headquarters of the purgatory of heaven capital unless their strength was similar to his. In such a blockade, even a mosquito couldn't fly in. A sword sealed the city. Daybreak suddenly turned his head and looked at the night sky around him. The night sky was extremely quiet, and only the vast sword energy was constantly roaring in the nothingness. It was invisible, but extremely real. This scene could be said to be a real prison. Chapter 962. It was as if there were countless blades and sword radiance quietly in the dark night sky, almost illusory, but the bloody scene just now was so real. Daybreak stood in front of the gate of the headquarters of the purgatory of heaven capital dully and could not say a word for a long time. He sealed the city with one sword and turned it into a prison. Even if he was an invincible realm expert, the scene in front of him was almost completely beyond his understanding. In Eastern Europe, Wang Tianzong's sword energy could travel tens of thousands of meters. That range was enough to cover the entire heaven capital. But that was an extreme outbreak. The purgatory of heaven capital was only the most central part of heaven capital. It was not surprising that Li Tianlan's sword energy could directly cover the purgatory of heaven capital. But it was strange how he could make the sword energy completely seal the headquarters of the purgatory of heaven capital. There was no practical meaning in bragging, and Li Tianlan was not so bored. Daybreak was very clear that since he said he could not go anywhere, then such a blockade would not dissipate in a short time. Daybreak stood in place for a while, and finally walked quickly to the gate. The guard at the gate had rushed out and was standing there looking at the corpse at the gate with an inexplicable look. Seeing Daybreak coming over, several guards bowed at the same time. Sound the alarm and inform all high-level people above the thunder-shocking realm to gather at the gate. Daybreak said in a deep voice. The guard froze for a moment and did not react for a while. The purgatory of heaven capital naturally had its own alarm system, and the alarm in the guard room at the gate was an orange major threat alarm. The Purgatory of Heaven capital had been rooted in Tiannan for more than 2 years. Even when Li Guangtu and Daybreak were in the weakest state due to serious injuries. Such an alarm had never sounded. Go. Daybreak glanced at him and said in a harsh tone. The guard took a deep breath and suddenly turned around and rushed into the guard room. Ear-piercing alarms suddenly rang wildly in the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. All the alarm lights inside the Purgatory of Heaven capital began to shine. Countless searchlights that had been set long ago shone on every blind spot inside the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The weapon terminals placed everywhere were all activated. The combatants kept their posts strictly, and the rotational personnel began to pick up their weapons and gather urgently. Outside Heaven capital, countless forces who were observing the Purgatory of Heaven capital stared at the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, which was as bright as day. They had no idea what had happened. Daybreak was still standing at the door, staring at the night sky outside the door coldly. Streaks of lightning flashed in the distance. The thunder-shocking realm experts in the Purgatory of Heaven capital rushed over one after another. They followed Daybreak's line of sight and saw a few corpses, but other than that, everything was normal. A few corpses, perhaps this was a provocation to the Purgatory of Heaven capital. But no matter what, it was not enough to trigger an orange alarm. Second Highness, what's the matter? A short man with an extremely fierce appearance took a step forward and asked with some doubt. He was an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm who joined the Purgatory of Heaven capital in the past 2 years. Before joining the Purgatory of Heaven capital, he was also a well-known loner in the dark world. His code name was Grey Ant. Now he was in charge of the internal guard of the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Although he had joined the Purgatory of Heaven capital for a short time, he could already be regarded as one of the real core higher-ups in terms of position. Daybreak didn't say anything. He just stretched out his hand. A dagger slipped out of his sleeve, and he held it tightly in his hand. Daybreak took a deep breath, and the sword intent of the invincible realm continued to condense in his hand. In an instant, the dagger had been completely wrapped in a dazzling ball of light. A group of thunder-shocking realm experts watched silently, and everyone looked extremely confused. Daybreak flicked his fingers gently. The ball of light in his hand floated to the gate with the dagger. The floating speed of the ball of light was extremely slow, but along the way, the space in front of it was constantly being torn and twisted. Everyone could see that Daybreak had almost gone all out this time. The ball of light floated to the gate. The sword energy surged. The alloy door trembled incessantly in the violent sword aura, leaving behind sword marks one after another. The ball of light condensed with a large amount of sword energy slowly floated through the gate. Then it disappeared. It was silent. There was no sign. It was as if it had never existed. All the light was completely swallowed up in an instant. Crack! In the slight sound, the dagger cracked, and then silently turned into powder, fluttering in the night sky. There was a dead silence around. Everyone opened their eyes subconsciously. Looking at this scene, they couldn't speak at all for a while. Daybreak's face was extremely gloomy. The moment his attack crossed the gate, he once again felt the majestic sword energy. The vast sword energy completely enveloped the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. It was so illusory. Not to mention the surrounding thunder-shocking realm experts, even Daybreak could only vaguely feel the existence of the sword energy. He could only vaguely feel the existence of the sword chi, but the sword chi was so real that his full-powered attack had been silently melted away. This meant that if he were to go in himself, he would not be able to last more than a few seconds. The huge gap was completely revealed in front of Daybreak because of this sword. This gap was almost too big for Daybreak to understand. What made his heart even colder was that after entering the invincible realm, he did not feel that the gap between him and Li Guangtu was so big in the occasional sparring with him. Li Guangtu's injury might not have healed. But at least for now, he came to a very real but not very willing to believe conclusion. Li Guangtu was really no match for Li Tianlan. As you can see, Daybreak was silent for a long time before he said in a low voice, "The headquarters has been completely blocked. From now on, no one can enter or leave. I have no way to break this blockade, and I don't know how long this blockade will last, so. Daybreak gritted his teeth fiercely. Our logistics reserves are very sufficient. From now on, no one in the Purgatory of Heaven capital is allowed to leave the headquarters. Members who are performing tasks outside are on standby. Without orders, no one is allowed to get close to Heaven capital. His voice was extremely hoarse and difficult, but it sounded like thunder in the ears of others. The headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital was completely blocked. Like a joke, like a nightmare, like whatever it was. All in all, it sounded like complete nonsense to others. But in fact, Daybreak's actions just now had proved the truth of all this. Who did it? Gray Ant's eyes were cold and manic. He had many flaws in his character, but the biggest advantage was that he could not change his mind once he decided on something. In other words, he was absolutely loyal. That was why Li Guangtu and Daybreak let him be in charge of internal defense. But now, someone had completely blocked the headquarters without him noticing. They couldn't go in or out. They were completely imprisoned. Gray Ant felt that he, the so-called head of internal defense, was completely like a decoration. It's Li Tianlan. Daybreak's tone was a little erratic. A few minutes ago, he came here, saw Huawu, and talked to His Highness. Then, he blocked the headquarters. Damn Li. Li. Tian. Dong Huang, Gray Ant cursed subconsciously. Then, he realized something. His voice became softer and softer, and his face gradually paled. No one thought Gray Ant's performance was terrible. Shameful. No one knew when it started. When the Dark World mentioned Li Tianlan, it was like the Dark World mentioned Sword Emperor a few years ago. It was not that there was no hostility and killing intent. But when it came to him, it was mostly a sense of powerlessness and fear. Li Tianlan easily blocked the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. In other words, if he wanted to, he could completely destroy this place and kill everyone at that moment. Li Tianlan, the Li family. Emperor Dong's palace. Purgatory of Heaven capital. Li Guangtu, all kinds of ties were entangled, and everyone's heart was a little complicated. A group of thunder-shocking realm experts suddenly fell silent. If that's the case, another middle-aged man who looked to be in his 50s came out. Daybreak, does that mean we can't go to East Island? From the simple name, one could see the current structure of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Most of the newly joined elite experts would always be respectful to Daybreak and call him Second Highness. Daybreak was indeed the second in command of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. And all the old people of the Li family would call him by his code name out of habit. They were all old brothers who had experienced countless life and death situations together, and there was no such thing as high or low status between them. Among the old people of the Li family, even some experts at the peak of the fire-flaming realm dared to put their arms around Daybreak's neck and drink with him in their spare time. But if everything went well, fewer and fewer people would call him by his code name, and more people would call him Second Highness. This was destined to be a very sad thing. So Daybreak had always cherished the present. For these brothers who had experienced countless life and death situations with him, he had never known what was the face and aura of the invincible realm. Daybreak smiled bitterly. This was the most uneasy problem for him now. Regaining control of East Island was the bottom line of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, and it was also the most important goal of the Purgatory of Heaven capital in the near future. Li Guangtu participated in the final battle of Beihai. When East Island was empty inside, the Purgatory of Heaven capital occupied East Island. If the final battle of Beihai went well, Li Tianlan would die. At that time, the Purgatory of Heaven capital would annex Emperor Dong's palace, unify Tiannan, and take Xinyuan City as its new headquarters. The power of East Island would become the extension of the power of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. At that time, the Purgatory of Heaven capital would expand to an incredible level. But now, the Purgatory of Heaven capital planned to send 2 groups of people to East Island. Dawn had secretly arrived in East Island with the first group. And Daybreak led the second group of people with the strongest combat capability to set off before the final battle. The scheduled departure time was tonight. But Li Tianlan now directly locked the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Outsiders couldn't get in, and their own people couldn't get out. Although Dawn was a superior a half-step to the invincible realm, his strength was not enough to conquer East Island. When Daybreak was trapped in the headquarters, this plan could be said to have completely failed. That was to say, from now on, they were already out of the battlefield in East Island. Daybreak gritted his teeth again, and his feminine face looked colder and colder in the night. In fact, His Majesty still cares about old times. In the crowd, another middle-aged man said softly, otherwise, why would he lock up the Purgatory of Heaven capital? With his strength, when we fight against him, he can completely kill us all. But now he came and went, only locking up the Purgatory of Heaven capital and making us out of the battlefield in East Island. When did he ever kill one of us? The crowd quieted down again. Daybreak didn't need to look back to know who was talking. The person who said this at this time was destined not to appear on the list of people going to East Island. But under such circumstances, when these words were said, everyone had some complicated feelings in their hearts. Daybreak's eyes flickered, and he slowly said, I will inform His Highness. If the matter in Beihai is not urgent, he may still have time to come back to solve this problem. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.